Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and this is my Kamikaze Pro build. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so if you're a regular viewer to the channel, then you'll know that recently I've unboxed pretty much all of these things, and the most recent of them all was the Gamemax Kamikaze Pro case. Now, I said in the unboxing that I was going to do a build on it, and it was going to be a budget build with a kind of office PC kind of theme going. So let's go through the parts, and I will then go through and tell you my findings and what I think of the case overall, and why I think you should buy it. So first of all, we've got the Kamikaze Pro case. Now that's £65 at the moment here in the UK. Motherboard wise, we've gone with the Asus Prime A320M-K. That one at the moment is £38. Moving on to the RAM, which you can see inside, it's Corsair LPX, and that was £75 for 16 gigabytes. The processor, or APU in this, is the Ryzen 2200G, which at the moment you can get on Amazon for around about £80. Then moving on, we've got an SSD, which isn't, I haven't got a box here, but it's a 240 gig SSD, which again, you're looking around about £26, £27 at the moment for that kind of thing. There's also a 2TB drive, which you could possibly pick up on the microphone, just slightly whirring away in there, which that at the moment you can get for about £55. Power supply, we've gone with the EVGA 450BT, which is actually a pretty decent bronze power supply, and that one we've picked up for about £38. Now the cooler, to keep all this nice and cool, is the Arctic Cooling Freezer 34, and this at the moment retails for about £27. So all in all, with everything that's in there and all that storage, you're looking at just over £400. I think it works like £404 if my addition's correct. So if that's how much it cost, let's talk about the build and my experiences and what my findings are. Okay, so taking this side off so you can see a little bit better inside there what's going on. Now as you can see, it's a micro ATX case, so when we were building this we had to think carefully about what we were going to put in it. Again, because it's an office PC, we're not going kind of all out overclocking or gaming for that matter, although this rig is actually capable of some light gaming thanks to the EVGA 8 APU, which is built into the CPU, or however you want to look at it. The Ryzen 2200G has got a few tricks up its sleeve, so it can play games, and also it's actually a pretty good workhorse. So when we were deciding on the motherboard, I went for the Asus Prime A320M-K. Now reason being, this is a micro ATX chassis, like I said. We wanted to go cheap, but not cheap and sacrifice kind of reliability and all that kind of stuff. So this is the board we went with, and actually I'm very glad we did. A lot of people are probably going to be hating on this, saying why didn't you go for a B450 or whatever it may be. But actually this has worked out really well, and for only £38 for this motherboard, it's absolutely brilliant. Even with the CPU under full load, which I actually left it in a stress test from CPU ID, doing the full stress test, and even during that testing, whilst I was filming the B-roll, the CPU didn't get over 55 degrees, and I actually went around with my thermometer and checked on all the VRMs, and all the VRMs are staying well under their kind of highest rated tolerances. Most of them are around about the 50 degrees, 60 degree mark, so well below the kind of 95 or 90 centigrade rating that they can go up to. Although we don't want them to go that high, but as it's shown, this board is going to be absolutely fine even under load. Now with a bigger processor, maybe a Ryzen 5 or Ryzen 7, that could change quite dramatically. So obviously if you're thinking about doing a build similar to this with a higher end processor, do be slightly wary about what this board's limitations are. So when it came to cooling, I went with the Arctic Freezer 34, as I said, and it actually fits in there. And I think it actually looks really good in there, considering this is just an air-cooled unit. I think that CPU fan, its big aluminium extrusions and all that, actually looks really nice. Again, let me know in the comments what you think. I think it looks fantastic. We could have gone with a more expensive cooler, or I did actually contemplate using the stock cooler, but the stock cooler that I had with this particular APU was a little bit on the noisy side, and even under pretty much idle conditions there was an annoying drone to the fan, so unfortunately it had to go. But I think this actually worked out a lot nicer, and it does keep the temperatures really good. Idle loading or just general internet browsing, most of the time the CPU doesn't get over 30 degrees, and with an ambient temperature at the moment in the UK of somewhere between 22 to 24 degrees, being about 5 or 6 degrees over ambient is a really good result. And again, if you're using this as a business PC, maybe it's under a desk or whatever, the extra cooling capacity is going to be great if there's a little bit of a restricted airflow. Although saying that, with the 3 120mm fans on the front and the 1 120mm fan on the back, airflow shouldn't be a problem whatsoever. I've kept this in the low speed setting for the fans, and it's been absolutely fantastic. In actual fact, putting it onto the high setting, didn't actually make that much of a difference, especially under load. It still hovered around the 54, 55 degree mark. Now, one of the other options in this case is the removable top filter. Now, if you're using intake fans of some sort on the top, then I guess that would be useful. But for extra cooling, then leaving the top off doesn't seem to make much difference either way. So I think of this more of a means of preventing anything actually getting inside the case or dropping in. Again, if you're in an office environment, if there's things like staples or paper clips or whatever, and you accidentally drop them, the last thing you want is them to go inside your PC. So leaving the filter on is going to be the best option. Now again, going back to the kind of the whole office PC thing, now some people are going to be looking at this saying tempered glass, addressable RGB in an office environment, it's not the greatest of ideas, but you try and find a case with a similar cooling capacity, but it looks minimalist these days, is actually a very difficult thing to do. Now, of course, what you can do is you can press and hold the RGB button and the fans will turn themselves off. So if you want a slightly more stealthy look, absolutely fine. And then the tempered glass on the side, again, it isn't overly blingy, so should fit into most office environments. And you never know, if it's in a certain office where you want it to actually look a little bit blingy, then it's absolutely perfect for that. So overall, the build process went very well. The motherboard fitted in absolutely easily, as expected. The rubber grommets inside allowed the wiring to be nice and neat and tidy. There's plenty of access along the top edge for the auxiliary CPU connectors, and again, the same thing at the bottom for our AC97 or HD audio connectors, the USB 3, the USB 2.0, and all the other front panel connectors. Absolutely easy to work with, plenty of options, and on the back, as you probably see from some of the B-roll, many tie down points, and it made for a very tidy build in the back, despite all the extra cabling for those RGB fans. Now going back to the I/O, actually, this is one thing which I think some office users, and even gamers for that matter, or home users are going to find really good. Even now with a Wi-Fi connector and also a wireless keyboard adapter in there, I've still got two USB 3.0 ports to plug in things like a camera, card reader, whatever it may be. And the position of them is fantastic. They're in a really nice, easy place to get to. Some of the cases that got them on the side I dislike immensely because it just adds something else that can be damaged, or if you're putting it into a desktop sort of cubby hole, then ease of access on the sides isn't great. So having them mounted here is the logical place to put them. And all the buttons along the top are nice and easy to use and tactile. The reset button is actually very difficult to depress, so you're not going to accidentally press that whilst removing a USB drive or something like that. And also the fan controller on the top, nice and easy, so if you are kind of having a gaming session and you do want a little bit of extra cooling performance, it's really easy just to flick the switch and take it up a notch. Or alternatively, if you want to go super quiet, maybe you're a YouTuber and you're trying to make some content, then you can turn the fans off completely and have this thing as quiet as possible. So looking at storage that we've put inside this, now we've got an SSD which you can just about make out in there, and also in the back we've got the 2TB hard drive, which is a mechanical drive, in the sleds at the back. Now the sleds in the back, I've got to be honest with you, weren't the easiest to use with. I did end up actually taking the entire rack out, putting the drive in, and then reinstalling the rack. It's made of a slightly thinner metal, and when I put the rubber grommets on the side of the hard drive to slot it in as you would normally, I did find it difficult to do that. It did go in and it was held in place, but it just didn't feel like it was fitting in snugly. So I took the cage out, put the drive in, then put the cage back in, and I found that much more satisfactory. It is a shame that there isn't a 2.5-inch drive bay adapter included, so that the SSD could have gone in there for a cleaner look on the inside. But again, for a £65 case with all these fans and the RGB included, it's not a massive deal, and there is lots of options of other places to mount these drives. It would have been even cleaner still if I'd have gone with the M.2 type drive on the inside. But again, for most people, I think this kind of budget end of the market, a 2.5-inch SSD or even a 3.5-inch drive are the more likely option to be installed in this. So let's move around to the rear of the case. Now this is the wiring section I've actually found very easy, and also you'll notice now there is something I've put in here to combat one of the actual problems I did find with this case, which wasn't one of the ones that we discussed in the previous video, so we'll elaborate on that a little bit more now. So as you can see, there's a big chunk of foam there. Now the reason for that is because the mechanical drive which is in this sled at the bottom, no matter what, even with the rubber grommets that are attached to the side, there was still some resonance going through the case. Now we found this very similar with the Co-Link case, which we reviewed a long time ago, which you can check out in a video up here. The Co-Link Stronghold was a fantastic case and it ticked all the boxes, and in fact was very reminiscent of this kind of setup, but it had a problem with resonance. So if you had a mechanical drive in there, or you had a power supply which had a slightly more industrial type fan, you would quite often get a resonance going through the chassis. So what I've done is, literally that is from the inside of the Gamemax packaging. I've literally cut off a little bit of packaging, used some double-sided tape and attached it to the back of this metal panel, which is where I was finding most of the noise coming from. And I could literally go along and press on the side of the case and the noise would stop immediately. Now when I took the actual 3.5-inch drive out, the noise went away altogether. So it is a mechanical noise which is being transferred and resonating through the rest of the chassis. But with this piece of styrofoam on the side, or whatever it is, packing material, because it touches against the side panel of the case, it holds it all in place and it stops all that noise, which actually makes this essentially pretty much silent. So moving on to the wiring, and as you can see, it's actually a relatively tidy job there. It's not too bad at all, considering this is a captive power supply. We've got a few wires which are tucked in underneath, which there is actually plenty of room for, which has actually been a bit of a letdown on some of the other cases we've reviewed recently where they've been a little bit tight on room down there. So we could have gone for with a slightly larger power supply. I have actually moved the drive cage up a notch. That can actually come back a little bit more, but I actually have found a benefit of this as well is the hard drive now is being cooled slightly more efficiently by the front mounted 120mm fan at the bottom. So the hard drive staying nice and cool. Yeah, it's all worked out pretty nicely. I've managed to cable tie most of this out of the way for the RGB controller and the fan controller, so that doesn't look too bad at all. This could be a little bit neater along the top, but for all intents and purposes, it works and it's quite neat and tidy. And also if I need to make any changes, it's relatively easy to get to. So we've made use of quite a lot of the tie-off points around the case and routed the cables around, but actually I think it's worked out pretty nicely and looks pretty good. And there's also plenty of room there. There is quite a bit of depth to store cables in, so if you've got maybe a slightly older power supply with loads of extra connectors on there, you shouldn't find that to be a problem whatsoever. One slight niggle I suppose would be the 2.5-inch drives which are mounted in this area and this area. When you're actually trying to put the screws through, you do find some of this wiring is in the way, but again, it's kind of like first world problems. It's not the end of the world. All you have to do is just hold the screws in with a magnetic screwdriver whilst you're holding the drive on the other side with one hand. Again, it could be simpler, but definitely not a deal breaker. So all in all, it's actually been a pretty good experience. Moving around to the back panel, the I/O shield, because of these rounded edges, I found that to be a little bit tricky and it didn't kind of snap into place the way you would expect it to, so it did take a little bit of manipulation to get it to fit into the right way. But again, not a deal breaker by any means. Once it's in and it's staying there. The removable PCI Express brackets are a great addition. If I wanted to upgrade this and put a graphics card in for maybe video editing or rendering or whatever, or just gaming, then these are removable and you can put them back in after if you decide it's not for you and you want to just go with the APU. Plenty of room for the power supply at the bottom, as we said. That's all filtered as well underneath. So again, office environments generally they tend to neglect the PCs quite badly and they tend to be quite dusty environments. So the filtered power supply entrance and the filters on the top and also the dual filter on the front are going to keep this thing pretty clean and tidy. Okay, so there you go. There is my findings, reviews and my usage of this Kamikaze Pro case from Gamemax. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about it? I'm actually really impressed with it. Despite its very minor kind of drawbacks and flaws, I think it actually looks really good. And I think if anyone was going to be given this as a present or you're building it for someone, I think it actually looks like a more expensive PC than it actually is. Now, I'm not too sure if you can actually pick up now the resonance. So I've taken the side panel off and you can hear it resonating. So if I touch the side panel, you can hear the noise stopping and starting. So hopefully that's coming through and you can understand why I did it. It's a real shame that that is one of the things that happens with this case. But again, I guess with modern technology, people are trying to kind of steer away now from 3.5-inch mechanical drives or mechanical drives in total, really. So most likely people are going to use solid state drives in this kind of machine. So it isn't going to be an issue. Again, a little bit of attention to detail on the build when they were actually making this case. Maybe slightly thicker steel would have been helpful. But like I said, again, it's not the end of the world and putting a little bit of foam in the back to dampen some noise. Most of us DIYers who are building our own PCs are probably going to be doing things like this to it anyway and making slight modifications. But unlike the Cooler Master Masterbox Lite 3.1 and the Masterbox Lite 5, this is going to require virtually no other maintenance other than that little bit of padding. We're not going to have to be cutting chunks out the front. We're not going to be having to add tons of extra fans to get it to cool itself. It's just going to work as it is and also look pretty nice at the same time. So there we go, there has been my thoughts and findings on the Gamemax Kamikaze Pro build. Do you think there's any other things I could have done, or any things you would have done differently to make this build better or cheaper for that matter? If there is, let me know in the comments section below. But in the meantime, I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.